A homeless woman found a ring and returned it to the millionaire who had lost it. And when a limousine stopped near her shack the next day. Blanca loved reading since childhood. Books were always something magical for her. Opening them, she was instantly transported to an entirely different world. Whenever she was sad or someone hurt her, Blanca found solace in the company of her favorite characters. Fantasy stories about brave knights, beautiful princesses, and mysterious worlds immersed her in amazing adventures and made her dream. As the years went by, Blanca's passion for reading only grew. She spent hours in the school library, exploring shelves filled with books of all genres, from classic literature to science fiction and adventure novels. She couldn't live without the smell of old books and the rustle of pages under her fingers. Every morning, Blanca would make herself cocoa as soon as she woke up and sit on the veranda with a book. Her parents were still asleep, and this was a moment of silence and solitude that belonged only to her. Forgetting about everything else, Blanca would dive into the world of fantasies created by famous authors. Books were her best friends. They shared their wisdom with her and were always there to comfort or entertain her. One of Blanca's favorite genres was historical literature. She loved learning about the lives of people in different eras, their cultures, and traditions. Stories of great civilizations, wars, and discoveries captured her imagination and made her ponder how past events affect our present. Blanca was also passionate about poetry. Her heart would beat faster when she opened the books of famous poets and began reading their innermost thoughts. Every word seemed like a precious gem that needed to be carefully examined to understand its true meaning. As Blanca grew older, she decided to enroll in the philology faculty. The thought of being able to read all the time made her happy and inspired her. Blanca became one of the top students and graduated from university with honors. After that, she was immediately offered a job as an editor at a local magazine. Blanca gladly accepted. The salary wasn't very high, but she gained experience, and after 2 years, she moved to the capital and started working as an editor at a publishing house. Now, she was almost always surrounded by books. They were everywhere, at work, on walks in the park, on trips, and at home. In the studio Blanca rented, books not only stood on shelves, but also lay on windowsills, on cabinets, and even on the floor. Unlike the other girls from the publishing house, Blanca spent her evenings reading on a cozy sofa with a blanket and her favorite cocoa. But one day, her best friend Nina invited her to a club. A band that performs songs based on the poetry of famous poets will be playing there tonight. "I think you'll like it," Nina explained. Blanca happily agreed. She had been feeling lonely lately, and her friend's invitation came at just the right time. In the evening, Blanca dressed up, wearing a beautiful white dress embroidered with artificial pearls and high-heeled shoes that she had kept from her university graduation. She styled her hair beautifully and wore long earrings with precious stones and pearls. Looking at herself in the mirror, Blanca smiled at her reflection. The thought of having a pleasant time made her glow with joy. The club Nina invited her to was in the city center and was known for its cozy atmosphere and high-quality live music. Blanca called a taxi and met Nina at the entrance to the club. When her friend saw her, she was very surprised. "You look so beautiful, Blanca. Your outfit suits you so well. I think we should go out more often." Blanca smiled and thanked Nina. Together, they entered the club, where they were greeted by soft, dim lights and the quiet sounds of an acoustic guitar. Musicians were already preparing for their performance on stage, checking their instruments and tuning their microphones. "I'm so glad we came here," Blanca said quietly, looking around. "This place is just magical. It's so nice to be here." Nina smiled in response. "Yes, me too. I've heard that these musicians are incredibly talented. They know how to convey the emotion of poetry through music." The girls took a table near the stage and ordered non-alcoholic drinks. Blanca noticed a tall, handsome man nearby who was looking at her with interest. He was wearing a suit and a white shirt. Nina saw him too. "Blanca, look at how he's looking at you," she whispered to her friend. "Do you know him?" "No," I've never seen him before, Blanca replied, feeling embarrassed. Nina smiled. Then he must like you, she said. At that moment, the lights in the hall went out, and a young man with a neat beard stepped onto the stage. That's their vocalist, Nina whispered, and Blanca nodded, not taking her eyes off the stage. Good evening, friends, the young man greeted the audience. We're happy to see you here. Are you ready to dive into the enchanting world of poetry? The hall burst into applause. We've been inspired by famous world poets in our work, the young man continued. We hope you enjoy our interpretation of their masterpieces. The audience applauded again. The first chords of the guitar sounded, and the hall was filled with the magic of music. The vocalist began to sing a song based on the poetry of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and his voice touched the hearts of the listeners. The music played with each line of the poem, giving it new shades of meaning. Everything sounded so harmonious that Blanca closed her eyes with pleasure. She felt every word, every note with every cell of her body. This is just incredible, Nina whispered when the first song ended. How do they do it? It's true art. Blanca agreed. I feel every word. The evening continued, and the band performed song after song based on the poetry of different poets. Each composition was unique and left an unforgettable impression. When the concert ended, the hall erupted in applause. The musicians bowed to the audience and thanked everyone for the warm reception. Blanca was deeply moved and shaken by the performance, so when the lights came on, she didn't immediately realize where she was. Nina's eyes sparkled with tears. I need a minute to gather myself, she said. Blanca nodded in agreement, and at that moment, she felt someone's gaze on her. She looked up and saw the same man who had been sitting at the nearby table. He was smiling at her. I see you enjoyed the performance, he said softly. Blanca blushed and nodded. It was amazingly beautiful and unforgettable, she shared her impressions. I agree with you, the man replied. These guys are a real treasure. I try not to miss their performances, even if I'm abroad at the time. Blanca raised her eyebrows in surprise. By the way, my name is Raul, the man introduced himself. And you? Blanca, the girl replied and introduced Nina. Very nice to meet you, Raul said politely. Perhaps you would like to take a walk in the fresh air? Blanca looked at Nina in panic. Her friend discreetly winked at her and said, Unfortunately, I need to go home, but I think Blanca can keep you company. Blanca almost fainted upon hearing this. Why was Nina doing this? Great, Raul smiled. Then I'll just have a word with the vocalist and be right back. With these words, the man got up from the table and walked away. Taking advantage of the moment, Blanca looked at Nina indignantly. Why did you do that? I thought we were friends, she exclaimed. Nina just shook her head. You're so silly, Blanca. Can't you see how he looks at you? He likes you, not me. That's why I decided to leave you two alone. Blanca nodded shyly. But I don't know what to talk to him about, she complained. You'll figure it out, Nina said and, hugging Blanca, headed for the exit. Raul returned a couple of minutes later and, to Blanca's amazement, gave her a white rose. This flower suits your outfit very well, he said, looking at her intently. Blanca took the flower and brought it to her face. She was very pleased with the man's attention. The young people left the club and went for a walk downtown. The evening was simply splendid. It turned out that Raul was easy to talk to, and Blanca felt wonderful. The man also loved literature, history, and, of course, poetry. After the walk, Raul called a taxi and took Blanca home. She thanked him for the wonderful evening. I haven't had such a pleasant evening in a long time, the girl confessed. I think we should make this a tradition, Raul replied. He asked for Blanca's phone number and hugged her goodbye. Blanca returned home feeling happy and content. The next day, Raul invited Blanca to visit a literary museum, and the girl happily agreed. After the tour, they went to a restaurant for dinner. Blanca guessed that Raul was doing quite well financially, but for her, it didn't matter. The young people started meeting regularly. They went to various places, walked in parks, and one day Raul invited Blanca to visit a nearby city to attend an evening with a famous poetess. Half a year passed this way. Every day, the young people discovered something new and amazing in each other. Raul always admired Blanca's intelligence and beauty, and she appreciated his support and masculinity. Blanca and Raul grew closer, and the girl realized she had fallen in love. Raul courted her beautifully, giving her gifts and taking care of her. Everyone around them admired their relationship. One day, Raul invited the girl to a restaurant and ordered champagne. It was a weekday, and Blanca was very surprised. "I just want this moment to be special and unforgettable," Raul explained. Blanca looked at him, puzzled, and the man pulled out a small red box from his jacket pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring with a beautiful diamond. "Blanca, you have become an important part of my life," Raul said, taking the girl's hand. "Every day with you is a joy and inspiration. I want to spend my whole life like this. Dear, will you marry me?" Blanca couldn't hold back tears of joy. "Yes, Raul. I will," she exclaimed. The man put the ring on her finger and kissed his beloved. A month later, they got married and spent their honeymoon abroad. Everything was magical, like a fairy tale. When the newlyweds returned, Raul said he didn't want Blanca to continue working. "My money is enough for both of us," he said. "But I love my job." Blanca tried to argue. "I understand, dear, but I would like you to stay home and create a cozy space for us," Raul replied. With a heavy heart, Blanca decided to agree, despite not being able to imagine life without her beloved work. "Then at least let me take private orders and do them at home, if you don't mind," she said, and Raul nodded. "If you want, but I don't understand why," he replied. "It's not about the money," Blanca tried to explain. "My work brings me joy, gives me energy and confidence." Raul said nothing, but his face spoke for him. He didn't understand Blanca. For him, work was always just business, a way to make money. If what he did stopped being profitable, he would switch to something else immediately. For Blanca, it was different. Books were her passion. She could do editing for free if suddenly she stopped getting paid for it. Their family life gradually became stable. However, after some time, Raul and Blanca started to argue. The man was often not home. He traveled for important meetings with business partners, and Blanca, who had to stay home, felt lonely. The opportunity to work saved her, but she lacked human interaction. Her friends quickly drifted away because she had nothing to talk about with them. Raul tried his best to pamper Blanca with expensive gifts. He ordered her flowers, gave her jewelry. But the girl was waiting for something else entirely. "Raul, I don't need all these expensive things. I want simple pleasures, walks in the park, dinners at home. Like before, when we weren't married yet," she said to her husband. But the man didn't understand her. "Don't you like my gifts and the fact that you don't have to work? You have a paradise life. Why are you unhappy?" "But happiness isn't in money or things. Happiness is being together," Blanca tried to explain. The conversation usually ended in mutual misunderstanding and a feeling of estrangement. Arguments became an inevitable part of Raul and Blanca's life, and the girl often cried, not knowing what to do. One day, feeling incredibly lonely, she went for a walk in the park and took a book with her. As she sat on a bench, a handsome young man approached her. He started a conversation, asking what she was reading, and Blanca answered him. They talked about books, and the guy turned out to be very knowledgeable and well-read. After a while, the young man suggested they have a cappuccino at a nearby cafe. Blanca hesitated for a moment, but she missed simple human interaction so much that she decided to agree. "I'm not doing anything wrong. We're just talking," she thought to herself. They went to the cafe and continued their conversation there. Then the young man said he had to go and asked for Blanca's phone number. The girl hesitated. "I want to warn you that I'm married," she told her new acquaintance. And I love my husband very much. The guy nodded. I saw the ring on your finger. But I really enjoyed talking to you. You know so much about books, and I sometimes have no one to talk to. Blanca sighed. I felt the same way talking to you. I just need a good friend, that's all. Then let's just be friends, the young man suggested. Blanca sighed with relief. He understood me and doesn't expect anything more, she thought. He, like me, just needs a good conversationalist. Blanca gave the guy her number and headed home. Late in the evening, a thunderstorm broke out. Raul came home looking like a storm cloud. Blanca, as usual, met her husband in the hallway and, seeing his face, got scared. What's wrong, dear? She gasped. Do you have problems at work? With these words, Blanca tried to hug him, but Raul pushed her away roughly. What's the matter, darling? Blanca asked, bewildered. Don't touch me. I know everything. Raul growled in response. Blanca looked at him in surprise. About what? Get out of my house. Right now. The man shouted. Blanca couldn't believe what she heard. And give me the ring. He added. Raul, what happened? The girl asked plaintively, tears welling up in her eyes. You know very well what you did today. Blanca still didn't understand the reason for Raul's anger. She started to recall what she had done during the day. Walking in the park, talking to the young man. Blanca covered her mouth with her hand, remembering her new acquaintance. Could Raul have seen them and now be jealous? If you mean the young man I met in the park, it's not what you think, Raul, Blanca tried to explain to her husband. We were just talking. And you gave him your phone number, Raul added angrily. Just to talk? I don't believe it and never will. Blanca realized that she couldn't explain to Raul how lonely she felt and that she needed simple interaction. I knew you were ready to cheat on me at any opportunity. Raul shouted in the meantime. So it's over between us. Get out on the street. Blanca couldn't believe that her loving and caring husband could speak to her in such a tone. She tried to protest, but her husband didn't let her say a word. I specifically hired this guy to test you. And you failed the test. Leave my house right now. With these words, Raul took the ring off Blanca's finger, then grabbed her by the shoulders and led her outside. Returning to the house, he slammed the door loudly. Blanca stood on the porch, her mouth open in astonishment. Aren't you even going to let me pack my things? She shouted. But Raul didn't answer. Blanca stood on the porch for about 10 minutes, hoping her husband would reconsider, then her legs gave way, and she sat down on the step and began to cry. Raul never came out to her. In the morning, the door opened. Sleepy Blanca, who had fallen asleep on the porch, looked at him with a pleading gaze. Raul, please. The young woman began, but Raul quickly slammed the door and, locking it, went down the steps and walked to the gate. Raul. Blanca shouted after him, but the man pretended not to hear. At the gate, he turned around. When I return, you should not be here, he snapped angrily. I'm going to see a lawyer today to file for an official divorce. Saying all this, the man turned, walked out onto the street, and got into his car. Blanca started crying again. How could Raul do this to her? He threw her out onto the street like some object. Blanca didn't know where to go. She wandered the city in a daze. She had no relatives or close friends in the capital. Only Nina, a colleague from work. But she didn't know where Nina lived, and she didn't have her phone number. So Blanca decided to go to her former workplace. Unfortunately, she was told that Nina had quit the publishing house. While Blanca had been at home, many of her acquaintances had found new jobs. So the girl had to leave without getting any help. Blanca walked down the street, not noticing anything around her. She was stunned and almost broken. The outside world seemed to be shrouded in fog. Her heart felt shattered into 1,000 pieces, each one aching and throbbing. Blanca nearly got hit by a car when she was crossing the street. Luckily, the driver managed to stop in time. The young woman never thought her relationship with Raoul could end so suddenly and cruelly. She spent the whole day wandering around the city like a ghost. Blanca's world had collapsed in an instant, and now she didn't know where to go or what to do next. In the evening, the wind started blowing, making the young woman, who was still in her house dress, shiver from the cold. Soon it got dark. Blanca walked through the deserted streets of the city, trying to find shelter for the night. She passed by closed shops and cafes, lit up with garlands and lanterns. Blanca's thoughts were full of pain and despair. How could she end up in this situation? What should she do next? Passing by a park, she noticed a bench under a large tree. Tired and cold, Blanca decided to sit for a minute and then continue on her way. She sat down on the bench and covered her face with her hands, feeling the hopelessness of her situation. Blanca realized she had no strength left to stand. She curled up on the bench and fell asleep. The next day repeated itself. Blanca wandered around the city all day, afraid that she would be taken to a police station. Around noon, the girl came to the river and noticed homeless people under a bridge. They were sitting by a fire, roasting sausages. Blanca was very hungry and decided to approach, though she was very scared. It turned out that a poor woman and her elderly father lived under the bridge. They, too, had ended up in a difficult situation. Their house had accidentally burned down, and they had no insurance, so now they had to survive. The woman, whose name was Agatha, took pity on Blanca, gave her a blanket, and fed her. "You can stay here with us," she said, and Blanca gratefully agreed. Agatha showed the young woman a shelter they had built together. "You will sleep here. My father and I will sleep in another shelter. No one will bother you," Agatha said. Thus began a completely new life for Blanca, one she could never have imagined before. At first, Agatha took care of the young woman, seeing that she was on the verge of despair. She shared warm clothes with Blanca and cooked for everyone. However, after a week, Agatha told Blanca that she needed to think about how she would earn money. "We can't take care of you forever," Agatha said reasonably. "Who knows what might happen to us? You need to stand on your own feet, Blanca." The woman was right. A couple of days later, people from the city administration came and said that they had resolved the issue, and Agatha and her father could move to new housing. Blanca was left under the bridge all alone. She dreamed that one day someone would come and take her away too, but she knew that was impossible. Gathering her strength, Blanca went to the publishing house where she used to work. She understood that she didn't look presentable. She had barely managed to wash her hair in the river and clean the clothes Agatha had given her, but Blanca still looked like a homeless beggar. Yet, the young woman hoped she would be lucky. And so it happened. When she explained what had happened to her, the chief editor took pity on her and promised to give her proofreading assignments. Blanca was very happy. Now she had to go to the publishing house several times a week and take heavy manuscripts to proofread by the river, then bring them back. When Blanca received her first payment, she could afford to take the bus. However, there was still no talk of renting a place or buying new clothes. One morning, Blanca, as usual, was sitting by the fire, listening to the sound of the river and editing a manuscript. The soup was cooking over the fire, and the young woman inhaled its aroma with pleasure. After finishing proofreading another chapter, Blanca stretched and stood up, carefully putting the manuscript away in the shelter. Then she decided to wash up in the river to freshen up. The water was cold but refreshing. Blanca knelt down and began to wash when her attention was suddenly drawn to something shiny. It was a gold ring lying among the stones and sand. Blanca couldn't believe her eyes. How could such a valuable piece of jewelry end up here? She reached out her hand and pulled the ring out of the water. It was adorned with rather large gemstones that looked very expensive. Blanca felt mixed emotions, joy from the find and anxiety about what to do next. "If I sell this ring, my problems will be solved," the young woman thought aloud. "But it doesn't belong to me. It would be much more honest if I tried to return the ring to its owner." Blanca examined the item closely and noticed an engraving with the words "with love and tenderness" and the initials AA on the inside of the ring. Perhaps these were the first letters of the owner's name and surname. The young woman realized she couldn't just keep the find for herself. Her conscience wouldn't allow her to claim someone else's property, even if she was in a difficult situation herself. Blanca firmly decided to try to find the owner of the ring. Returning to her shack, the young woman began to think about how best to proceed. She didn't have internet access to post an announcement about the find. So she decided to go to a publishing house and ask the secretary to do it for her. Blanca had breakfast, finished her work, and, putting the ring in her pocket, headed to the publishing house. The secretary agreed to help the young woman and posted an announcement about the found ring on several local websites. A few days passed. Every time Blanca came to the publishing house, she asked the secretary if anyone had called about the ring, but so far, no one had responded to the announcement. The young woman had already begun to think she might have to keep the ring herself when one day, arriving at work, she saw a very wealthy-looking man waiting for her in the lobby. "Blanca, this man has come to retrieve the ring," the secretary told the young woman. "I told him you found it in the river by the bridge." Blanca nodded and approached the man. "Good day, miss," he said excitedly, standing up from the sofa he was sitting on. "My name is Antonio Amato, and I am a well-known businessman in the city. About a month ago, I was walking along the river and accidentally lost a gold ring that I was going to give to my fiancée. It must have fallen into the sand and then was washed away by the water. Luckily, I came across your announcement and came here." Blanca felt relieved. Her efforts were not in vain. "I am very happy to be able to return your lost item. I always carried it with me just in case." With these words, Blanca took out the ring and handed it to Antonio. "I am very grateful to you and touched by your honesty. Seeing that you are currently in a difficult situation, I would like to help you. Please accept this money as a token of my gratitude." Blanca was embarrassed to hear these words and wanted to refuse, but then she realized that this would help her start a new life. So the young woman agreed to accept the money that Antonio was offering her. "Thank you very much," Blanca said, feeling that she might cry with happiness. "I really need the money right now." With that, Blanca and Antonio parted ways, and the young woman thought they would never see each other again. She returned to the riverbank to spend one more night in her shack. The next day, Blanca firmly decided to move to a hostel to live there initially and find good housing. The young woman couldn't fall asleep for a long time, thinking about how things would turn out, so she woke up late the next day. She was awakened by the sound of a car engine. A sleepy Blanca came out of the shack and couldn't believe her eyes. A limousine was parked near the bridge. Blanca thought that perhaps Antonio Amato had come because she had no other wealthy acquaintances except Raul. But her ex-husband never drove a limousine. While Blanca was pondering, the car door opened, and a beautiful and very elegant young woman got out of the car. She had blonde hair and big blue eyes with velvety lashes. The stranger was dressed in a white blouse, a long silk skirt with a slit, and high-heeled shoes. Enchanted by her beauty, Blanca did not immediately notice that the young woman's face was tear-stained. "Good morning, miss," the stranger addressed Blanca. "Hello," she responded. "My name is Maria Martinez. I am Antonio Amato's fiancée." Blanca raised her eyebrows in surprise. Why had the fiancée of a famous businessman come here? As if hearing her unspoken question, Maria hastily said, "Antonio is missing. He doesn't answer my calls. And this morning a courier brought this envelope." Blanca didn't understand why Maria had come to her and was telling her all this, but she prepared to listen attentively. Meanwhile, Antonio's fiancée approached closer and showed the contents of the envelope. Inside was the same gold ring and a note. "Maria, forgive me, but we cannot be together. Accept this ring as a token of my love." "Antonio," the note read in a hurried handwriting. "But why are you showing this to me?" Blanca finally asked. "The thing is," Maria began to explain, "that last night Antonio called me and with laughter told me that he had lost the ring he wanted to give me. I was already upset, but he said that a poor girl had found the jewelry in the river under the bridge. He was very happy because, according to him, he had been looking for this ring for a long time, and it was special. Moreover, Antonio was surprised and grateful to you for not claiming the item for yourself. We talked for about half an hour, and all this time my fiancée was cheerful and in a very positive mood. And then this morning, I received this envelope. Blanca was filled with a bad premonition. She felt that something had happened to Antonio. He had indeed been very glad and happy when she returned the ring to him. Nothing indicated that he wanted to break up with his fiancée. Blanca thoughtfully twirled the envelope in her hands. It was quite ordinary. Then she took out a ring from it and examined it closely. The piece of jewelry looked just like she remembered it. However, a gut feeling made the young woman look inside. She recalled that the engraving on the ring consisted of the phrase, "with love and tenderness," and the initials of the owner. However, there was no inscription on this ring. The inner part of the ring was completely smooth. "This is a different ring," Blanca said. "What?" Antonio's fiancée was surprised. "The ring he was going to give you had an engraving." Maria staggered. "What could this mean?" she asked Blanca. The latter shrugged. "I don't know, but one thing is certain, the ring was swapped." "Are you sure this is Antonio's handwriting?" Maria carefully examined the note. "Yes, the handwriting is very similar, but I can't say for sure because it's clear the person who wrote this was in a hurry." Blanca agreed with the girl's words. "I think you should report this to the police," she said. "We might be dealing with a crime." Antonio's fiancée nodded and, thanking Blanca, headed back to the limousine. The young woman watched her go and, sighing, returned to her hut. She decided to pack her few belongings, have breakfast, and head to the city. All this took no more than 2 hours. When Blanca was finally ready, she heard a strange noise coming from the small grove near the river. Blanca's heart pounded desperately. She was very scared. She had never felt such anxiety while living here. The young woman stared intently towards the grove when suddenly a man appeared. He was dressed in rags and limping on one leg. His face was covered in bruises. Blanca wanted to scream, but her voice failed. Moreover, she knew that no one would hear her here. She froze, unable to move. "Don't be afraid of me," she suddenly heard a soft voice that seemed strangely familiar. "Who are you?" Blanca asked, squinting and trying to understand who was in front of her. "It's me, Antonio Amato," the man quietly named himself. "It can't be." Blanca gasped. When the man came closer, she indeed recognized him. "But what happened to you?" "It's a long story, but I'm ready to tell you," Antonio replied. He and Blanca sat by the extinguished fire, and the businessman began his story. "I grew up in a poor family. When I was little, I dreamed of one day becoming rich so I could afford everything I wanted. But my parents didn't have the connections or money to secure a good future for me. So I took the wrong path. When I was 18, I got involved with a criminal gang that sponsored all my ventures. This is how I became a well-known businessman through dishonest means. Then I met Maria and regretted everything I had done. But I thought that if I were poor, she would never look at me. So I continued my dishonest business. When my relationship with Maria became too serious and I wanted to make her my wife, I realized that these people wouldn't let us live in peace. That's when I threw the ring into the river so they wouldn't find out anything. I decided to give up happiness. But I couldn't. I was drawn to Maria. And I did everything to find that ring. Yesterday, I was very happy that I succeeded. I firmly decided to deal with my past and thought it was a good sign that I would succeed. But I was deeply mistaken. I called the leader of the criminal gang and said that from now on I would conduct my business honestly. He laughed and said it was too late to change anything, then hung up. That night, people broke into my house, grabbed me, and took me somewhere, but I managed to escape. I realized that if I returned to Maria or even contacted her, she would be in danger. So I decided to lay low. Before we met, the secretary at the publishing house told me that you live under the bridge by the river, and I snuck here. I don't have a phone, so no one can track me. Blanca listened very carefully, and when Antonio finished, she said, "So it wasn't you who sent the ring and note to Maria? She was here a couple of hours ago. Your fiancée is heartbroken. She thinks you're in trouble." "What?" Antonio couldn't believe it, and after a short pause, he asked, "And what was in the note? What did the ring look like?" "It looked like yours, but without the engraving. And the note said that you didn't want to see her anymore," Blanca replied. Antonio sighed heavily and let out a bitter groan. "Poor Maria. I don't want her to suffer. So they must have listened to our phone conversation and sent her a similar ring to deceive her. I don't know what to do now. The only solution is to leave here alone and start a new life." "But what about your fiancée?" Blanca asked. "She will go crazy with grief. But I can't take her with me. She's used to luxury," Antonio admitted. "And wandering with me, is that the happiness she deserves?" "It seemed to me that she loves you," Blanca said softly. Antonio looked at her in amazement. "But how can anyone love someone who has been lying to others all this time and gaining wealth dishonestly? And now will be forced to hide from the law and bad guys. People love not for something, but despite it," Blanca remarked philosophically. She herself sometimes remembered Raoul, and her heart still ached from the unhealed wound. "I need to think it over," Antonio said. "Are you leaving? May I stay in this hut for now?" Blanca nodded and, taking her belongings, went to the city. She found a decent hostel and checked in. Everything seemed fine, and her life was getting back on track. But Blanca couldn't forget Antonio and Maria's story. Were they really not destined to be together? Blanca was very worried about them. A week passed, and the girl couldn't stand it anymore. She decided to go to the bridge to find out how Antonio was doing. Had he left, or was he still living in the hut? Blanca reached the place where the bridge was located by bus and began to descend. From afar, she noticed that the place under the bridge was uninhabited. Blanca sighed. It meant she wouldn't find out what had happened to Antonio and how his story ended. Blanca stood for a while by the long-extinguished fire and suddenly wanted to look inside the hut. There, on the straw-covered floor, she found a note, weighed down by a stone. She took the scrap of paper in her hands. "Blanca, I don't know why, but I have a feeling that you will come back here to meet me again. You have a big kind heart, and I trust you completely. Please, if you ever read these lines, I ask for your help. Go to my fiancée. You can find her address in the directory and tell her where I have gone." I wrote the address on the other side of this note. Blanca, you are our angel, and I thank you in advance for your help. Blanca turned the note over. It turned out that Antonio had written the message on a scrap of one of the old, useless manuscripts she had once edited. She barely managed to make out the tiny handwritten letters hidden among the printed words. Memorizing the address, the young woman tore up the note just in case. She left the shack and hurried to the bus stop, feeling tense all over. Blanca feared she might be followed. She returned home and used her new mobile phone to go online. Finding Antonio's fiancée's address, she decided to visit her without delay. The house where Maria lived turned out to be the epitome of elegance. Located in the city center, it was surrounded by a well-tended garden and enclosed by a high fence. Blanca saw a bell at the entrance and rang it. Someone answered, and she walked along a gravel path to the house. At the door, a tall man with a pleasant and welcoming appearance was waiting for her. "I wonder who that is," Blanca thought, feeling her heart race with excitement. "Good afternoon. How can I help you, miss?" the man asked politely. "Hello, my name is Blanca, and I came here to speak with Miss Maria. Does she live here?" "Is she home?" the young woman asked. "Yes, she is my sister," the man said, nodding toward a beautiful gazebo. "Could you wait for her in the garden?" Blanca nodded and walked to the gazebo. Inside, it was very cozy. The young woman sat on a bench covered with soft fabric and began to wait. About 5 minutes later, Maria appeared. Seeing Blanca, she gasped and ran toward her. It's you, she exclaimed in amazement. Good afternoon, Maria. I came here to deliver a message from Antonio. Blanca told the former businessman's fiancé everything she knew. Listening to the girl, Maria could not hold back her tears. I thought Antonio was dead, she confessed. The police couldn't help me at all. I cried so much. Blanca nodded understandingly. I can imagine what you must have felt, she remarked. How wonderful that Antonio is alive. It means he loves and waits for me. Maria exclaimed joyfully. Yes, but he was very afraid that you wouldn't want to see him anymore. Maria shook her head. I want to be with him no matter what, Maria confessed. His past doesn't matter to me. The fact that he's no longer a wealthy businessman doesn't matter at all. I truly love him. Then you need to go and tell him that, Blanca said and gave the young woman Antonio's new address. How can I thank you? Maria asked, but Blanca just shrugged. Your fiancé already helped me once when I returned his ring. I don't need anything else. I've started a new life, rented a place. I have a job I love. Everything will be fine now. Maria nodded. But at least let me ask my brother to drive you home. Blanca blushed. Oh, that's not necessary, I can take the bus. I'm sure it will be faster and more comfortable by car. Besides, he was going somewhere anyway. With these words, Maria ran into the house. A couple of minutes later, she and her brother appeared at the door. I'd be happy to drive you home, the brother said, nodding at Blanca, who immediately blushed. By the way, my name is Aurelio. Blanca, the young woman, introduced herself. Aurelio escorted her to his jeep and helped her in. Then he got in and started the engine. Blanca told him her address. Aurelio looked at her closely through the mirror. Despite your embarrassment, you look pale, he suddenly stated. Admit it, you haven't eaten in a while? Blanca looked at the man in surprise and nodded. Yes. I just realized that, she admitted. Then we'll stop at a decent place and have lunch first, Aurelio said in a tone that brooked no argument. Blanca had to agree. Deep down, she felt happy and delighted to be going somewhere with a man she liked. Aurelio took her to a restaurant, and they had a wonderful lunch, talking about various topics. The man turned out to be quite erudite, but he also had a great sense of humor. Blanca couldn't stop laughing at his jokes. When they finished lunch, Aurelio drove the young woman home and asked for her phone number. She happily gave it to him. The young people started meeting almost every day and eventually fell in love with each other. Blanca was very happy and no longer felt lonely. She loved her new life. Things also went well for Antonio and Maria. Antonio found a simple job under an assumed name and earned a decent living, while Maria took care of setting up their new rental home. They too began a completely new and happy life. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. "What is that idiot doing?" "All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. "If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you." I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. "Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay?" I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. "Yes, I'm inviting my father." "That's great. I might invite my parents too." I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.